Namaskar. The topic of discussion in this module is on coral reefs and atolls. The study of physical geography needs an understanding of various terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. The aquatic ecosystems include both freshwater and marine water ecosystems. Marine ecosystems include the habitat living within the seas and oceans and also the land bordering the coastlines. Under the marine ecosystems, the habitat of seas and oceans, estuaries, onshore features, tidal inlets and coral reefs and atolls are all included. One of the primary ecosystems of shallow marine waters is the existence of coral reefs. The habitat of coral reefs are very unique. The corals display a tremendous potential for other natural resources and also provide a lot of tourism opportunities. Corals were first appeared in the Cambrian period sometime about 570 million years ago. They are extremely rare as fossils until the Ordovician period. Afterwards, the rugose and tabulate corals became widespread in the world. The corals were first seen during the year 1815 by a naturalist. At that time, the name biohem was given to the corals and coral reefs as an initial term. Coral reefs are truly one of the most beautiful ecosystems. Over 150 million square kilometers of the earth are covered by coral reefs. That is more than 25 times the size of the United States. The largest coral reefs is the Great Barrier Reef off the eastern coast of Australia. Whomsoever goes to Queensland can see the stretches of Great Barrier Reefs in the eastern side. It stretches for more than 1500 kilometers. Some coral reefs are thousands of meters thick. Coral reef zones are the pleasant home to almost 1/4 of all the marine animals and plants. The pirates used to hide their treasures in the sheltered coves of the coral reefs. Now anyone with a scuba diving tank or snorkel can find the strange and beautiful treasures of the coral reefs. Many mounds of beautifully colored corals are seen at the bottom of the bluish sea waters. We might have seen them in some television programs and also in some movies. These mounds are actually millions of tiny creatures called coral polyps that live upon the skeleton of the dead corals. Coral reefs are one of the most diverse, complex and beautiful ecosystems on the earth. Coral reef ecosystems benefit humans commercially, recreationally and environmentally. The abundant biological diversity of the coral reef ecosystems not only include corals but also thousands of other plants and animal species. It is always interesting to study the coral reefs and their characteristics. Hence, in this episode, we are going to learn about the ecology of corals and their environments. The modules covered in this lesson are the origin of coral reefs, the types of corals, reef forming environment, the ecosystem characteristics and the destruction of corals. Let us see the first one, the origin of coral reefs. Coral reefs are major geological structures built by biological activity. They are formed through the accumulation of the skeletons of corals and coralline algae and of the sand made from algae and animal shells. The coral reef ecosystem is very complex with more different species crowded in a small area than almost any other habitat on the earth. Corals can be seen along some of the beaches looking as a piece of rock-like material. The corals are the skeletons of many tiny sea animals living side by side. Each one of these animals is known as a coral polyp. Coral polyps are tiny, primitive marine organisms. Each coral polyp is an individual organism and the reef is made up of colonies of these organisms. A coral polyp is a soft, almost transparent animal which builds its own skeleton outside its body. Since it has no backbone, it is an invertebrate. Let us see the parts of a coral polyp. The parts of a coral polyp is to be understood first. There are three main parts in a coral polyp. They are its base, mouth and a middle portion. The base of the polyp is attached to its skeleton. The mouth or open end has tentacles around its edge. The middle section is shaped like a tube. It has a hollow space inside and is known as the gut. A polyp is made up of two cell layers as the epidermis and the gastrodermis. The non-tissue layer between the gastrodermis and the epidermis is called as the mesoglia. The polyp contains mesentery filaments which contain nematocysts which are used for food capturing, a pharynx which are all endothelial disappearments. These are horizontal layers of the skeletal materials, and lastly the columella. This is the coral axis of the corallite found below the mouth. The corallite is the part of the skeleton deposited by one polyp. The skeletal wall around each polyp is called as theca. The other structures include the calyx, which is the upper opening of the corallite, the coenocerc, which is the coral tissue that stretches over the surface of the coral between the polyps, and the coenosteum, which is the skeletal material around the corallites, and lastly the corallum, which is the skeleton of the coral. The coral anatomy also includes the calcareous plate-like structures known as septa. The septa radiate from the wall to the center of the corallite. There are two types of septa known as inset septa, which lie below the corallite wall, and exert septa, which protrude above the corallite wall. Corals which produce a hard skeleton are called as stony corals. They have special cells on the outskirts of their bodies which produce a limestone substance. This makes them very hard like a rock. The polyps sit in the cup-like portions of the skeletons. Corals exhibit sexual and asexual reproduction. The coral colony expands in size by budding. Budding may be intratentacular, in which the new bud forms from the oral discs of the old polyp, as in Diploria, or extratentacular, in which the new polyp forms from the base of the old polyp, as seen in Montastria cavernosa. A common type of asexual reproduction in corals is done by fragmentation. The broken pieces of corals that land on a suitable substrate may begin growing and produce a new colony also. This type of reproduction is common in branching corals like Acropora cervicornis, in which a positive correlation was found between fragment size and the survival. Many coral species mass spawn. Within a 24-hour period, all the corals from one species and often within a genus release their eggs and sperms at the same time and reproduce drastically. Let us see the marine biology of coral reefs. A coral reef starts with a single tiny coral animal floating in the water. When it finds a hard subsurface, it settles on the rock and attaches to it. This becomes the parent coral polyp. Then the polyp begins producing its hard skeleton. After the polyp grows for a period of time, the little polyps begin budding out of its own body. As the buds grow, they will begin forming buds of their own. The result of this repeated budding is a huge number of polyps living together in a group or colonies. Corals can also reproduce in yet another way. Adult members of the colony can produce a small coral animal. This can float away to a longer distance in water. If it is not eaten, then this may start a new coral reef several miles away from the origin. The polyps of hard corals are attached to one another by a layer of tissue. When the polyps die, their skeletons remain and a new generation of polyps can grow on the top of them. After several years, they form a great structure called the reefs. The rate of coral growth is very slow. It takes thousands of years for a reef to grow just 3 feet. A coral reef is composed of calcium carbonate or limestone derived from the water by the reef organisms. These organisms are colonies of coral polyps and coralline algae. Corals are gastrovascular marine cnidarians belonging to the phylum Cnidaria and the class Anthozoa. The group includes the important reef builders known as hermatypic corals found in tropical oceans. These belong to the subclass Zoantheria of the order Scleractinia. The later are known as stony corals. The hermatypic corals obtain much of their nutrient requirement from the symbiotic unicellular algae called Zooxanthellae and are all dependent upon the sunlight. As a result, these corals are usually found not far beneath the surface, although in clear water corals can grow at a depth of 60 meters. Corals breed by spawning with many corals of the same species in a region, releasing gametes simultaneously over a period of 1 to several nights around a full moon. Many animals live near corals. Corals provide the food through the food chain they support. Corals also provide shelter for all its predators from the ocean waves and currents. Let us see the second part of the type of corals. Corals belongs to a large group of invertebrates which include jellyfish, sea anemones and hydroids. Coral animals come in three varieties: hard, soft and sea fans. Coral reefs take two main forms as shallow water reefs and deep water reefs. The deep water reefs have only recently been discovered, often located in dark cold water and growing very slowly in the absence of light. Corals are of two types, as perforate and imperforate types. The perforate corals have porous skeletons with connections between the polyps through the skeletons. The imperforate corals have solid skeletons. Many corals have different growth forms. They can be plocoid, as in Tubostria coccinea, they are the orange cup corals, and Favia fragum, which are called as the golf ball corals. They can also be meandroid, in which corallites form a series within the same walls, as seen in the species Dendrogyra cylindrus, that is the pillar corals. The other forms include coccoid, spherical shaped and phallicoid corals, as seen in Eusmelia fastigaiata. There are several other types of corals, notably the octocorals. The corals classified in other orders of subclass Zoantheria are including the black corals and the soft corals. The black corals belong to the order Antipatharia and the soft corals belong to the order Zoanthenaria. Extinct corals include rugose corals and tabulate corals. These two groups went extinct at the end of the Paleozoic period. Most other anthozoans would be treated under the common name of sea anemones. The common types of corals are classified into two major varieties as stony and soft varieties. The stony corals include stony corals, finger corals, fungus corals, brain corals, tube corals, rose corals, staghorn corals and the lettuce leaf corals. The soft coral varieties include the sea fan corals, bushy soft corals, the sea feather corals and the black corals. The live hard corals can be divided into four major forms. The major forms are branching forms, massive forms, tabulate or flat forms and miscellaneous forms or other forms. Let us see the third aspect of reef forming environment. Corals build their reefs only in warm and shallow waters. They do not grow well where they are directly exposed to the sun or rain for a long period of time. They also do not grow where the water is too salty or too muddy. Coral reefs are found in all oceans of the world, generally between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Because of the reef building environment available in this zone, corals grow well in this particular water. The reef building corals are found mainly in the photic zone, that is less than 50 meters depth, where the sunlight reaches the ground and offers the corals enough energy to grow. The corals themselves do not photosynthesize, but they live in a symbiotic relationship with the types of microscopic algae that photosynthesize the food for them. Because of this, coral reefs also grow much faster in clear water which absorbs less light. The coral's growth needs a clean and warm water. The best temperature for coral growth is 18 degrees centigrade. In general, reefs form where the following set of conditions are satisfied: warm water not cooling below 18 degrees centigrade during the year, then wave swept environment with high energy coast, a hard substrate, normal marine salinity water, absence of abundant clastic detritus, and shallow water environment in which the water depth should be less than 30 meters. Corals are major contributors to the physical structures of coral reefs that develop only in tropical and subtropical waters. Isolated corals exist even in cold waters. Coral reefs will not grow in the vicinity of river mouths. They tend to be better developed on the windward side of the islands. Let us see the fourth aspect of the ecosystem characteristics. Coral reefs are made up of much more than corals and their skeletal remains. The other organisms living in reefs deposit calcium carbonate like limestone materials above the corals. Reefs provide the home for a variety of plants and animals. The open spaces, sinks and cracks available in the hard coral mass made suitable shelter and feeding grounds for the marine worms, sea urchins, sponges, sea fans, mollusks, crabs, shrimps and sea anemones and fishes to survive. The energy which cycles through the reef keeps all plants and animals alive. The energy comes from the sun. The path of energy flow is from the sun into plants, then into animals which eat the plants, and so on. They are also as follows. The sunlight provides direct energy for the ecosystem. The water currents bring animals, plants and dissolved food to the reef. The reef plants use the sunlight and nutrients to grow. The reef environment supports the planktons. Plants are abundant in coral reefs. They provide the basic food for the entire ecosystem. There are many reef animals which eat the plants and are eaten by other animals. They are small like crustaceans and worms. There are many larger animals like sponges existing in the coral environment. There are zooplanktons living at the base of the coral reefs. The coral reef zones are home to 1/4 of all the marine plants and animals. Nearly 1 million species of fish, crabs, eels, mollusks, sponges, worms, grasses, algae and other marine animals live on the reefs and use them as nurseries to protect their young ones. Some inhabitants of the coral reefs are the dugong, sea mammals, sea horses, moray eels, octopus, sea turtle, crown of thorn starfishes, giant clams, parrotfishes, clownfishes, lionfishes and scorpion fishes. Crustaceans are joint-legged animals which are existing in the coral environments. They include crabs, shrimps and lobsters. Conchs and other reef dwellers are also existing in coral environments. They include snails, clams, queen conch, helmet conch and fireworms. The sponges include basket sponge, tube sponge, vase sponge, brush sponge, red fire sponge and loggerhead sponge. The reef fishes include the grunt, the snapper, the mutton snappers, the parrotfish, the angelfish, goatfish, porcupine fish, barracuda fish, eel and the scorpion fish. The major types of coral reefs identified so far are to be understood. Coral reefs can be classified based on their morphology, evolution, size, depth of the surrounding water and the relationship to the nearby land. The morphology is the major criteria considered in this classification. Coral reefs take a variety of forms as defined below. Apron reef, these are short reef resembling a fringing reef but more sloped, extending out and downward from a point or peninsular shore. Then the second category is the fringing reefs. These are reefs extending directly out from a shoreline and more or less following the trend of the shoreline. The third one is the barrier reef, and these are reefs separated from a mainland or island shore by a lagoon. The example is the Great Barrier Reef. And the next one is the patch reef, which are isolated, often circular reefs, usually within a lagoon or embayment. Then next one is the ribbon reef, which are long, narrow and somewhat winding reef, usually associated with an atoll lagoon. And table reef, isolated reefs approaching an atoll type but without a lagoon. And the last one is the atoll reefs, a more or less circular or continuous barrier reef surrounding a lagoon without a central island. Coral atolls are rings of corals that have grown on the top of old sunken volcanoes in the oceans. They also begin as fringing reefs surrounding a volcanic island. Then as the volcano sinks, the reef continues to grow and eventually form the reef zones. Let us see the fifth aspect of destruction of corals. Coral reefs provide a natural habitat and massive protection for different species of marine animals and fishes. They are not plants, they are living organisms that provide an environment for fishes to breed. Without them, fishes in the oceans may become homeless. Humans continue to represent the single biggest threat to all the coral reefs. In particular, the land-based pollution and overfishing are the most serious threats to these ecosystems. The live food fish trade has been implicated as one driver of decline due to the use of cyanide in the capture of fish. High levels of land development have also been threatening the survival of coral reefs. Due to the increased demand for live reef fish in the Northern America and Europe, the use of cyanide fishing has increased in the Indo-Pacific region. 85% of the world's aquarium fish are caught in this region and almost all of them are caught using cyanide. Cyanide is used to stun the fish in order to easily capture them for trade. It is detrimental to the organs of fish, which would explain the 90% mortality rate of the cyanide captured fishes. Cyanide is also very destructive to the surrounding coral reef ecosystems. It kills corals and other reef invertebrates. Corals are also harmed by the poor harvesting practices of the live fish trade. Fishermen sometimes pound on the reef with crowbars and rocks to scare the fishes into nets and pry corals apart to retrieve the stunned fishes. Dynamite fishing is another extremely destructive method that fishermen use to harvest the small fishes. The procedure of dynamite fishing starts with a bottle that is filled with explosives made of potassium nitrate. Once the dynamite goes off, the explosion brings about an underwater shock wave, causing the swim bladers of fish to burst, making them float to the top of the waters. A second blast is often set off after the first to kill any larger predators that are attached to the initial kill of the smaller fish. This method of fishing does not only kill small fish but also claims the lives of many reef animals. During the year 1998 and 2004, El Nino weather phenomenon, in which the sea surface temperatures rose well above the normal temperatures, many tropical coral reefs were bleached and killed. The coral diseases and coral bleaching are yet another phenomena which are destroying the corals. Coral diseases are rapidly spreading worldwide. Temperature changes such as the one related to El Nino are made responsible for the lowered resistance of corals to infections. The diseases coming to corals without the role of pathogens include tissue bleaching, band disease, white plague and white pox. The diseases with pathogen include black band disease, red band disease, black aggressive bands, lethal organs disease, yellow band disease and more diseases. Most are caused by bacteria or triggered by overgrowth of cyanobacteria. The worldwide average 16% of the reefs are lost due to these reasons and 27% of the reefs are lost due to acute threats. In certain areas, the share of affected reefs can be substantially higher. The construction work is another important mechanism of destroying the corals. Reefs are destroyed by various types of constructions like harbors, seaside highways and hotels. Corals are also cut and used as building stones in many coastal towns. It is estimated that about 60% of the world's reefs are at risk due to destructive human related activities. The threat to the health of the reefs is particularly strong in the Southeast Asia, where an enormous 80% of the reefs are considered endangered. Coral reefs are truly one of the most beautiful biomes. Future generations may not have the opportunity to see these coral reefs. Coral reefs around the world are being damaged and destroyed at an increased rate. Marine biologists who monitor the reefs say that 10% of them are already destroyed and 70% of them could be gone in just another 40 years from now unless we change our methods of treatment. Humans should not destroy the corals for any reasons. A thing of beauty is joy forever. The beautiful corals are the wonderful creatures of nature. Let us protect these corals and the coral environments.